Her early records are collector's items. Her writing and playing has become part of jazz history. She has transcended the difficulties experienced by women in the music field. Mary Lou's playing was real, earthy, running through all the emotions. It spoke volumes, for there was much in its creator that came out in the music. She had none of the typical trappings of show business. She seemed almost indifferent to her appearance, her hair brushed casually, her dress plain and unassuming, her only jewelry, a gold cross on a chain. But Mary Lou Williams was not a plain woman. She was beautiful. Mary Lou Williams was an arranger, composer, pianist, and educator that exemplified all the complexities, tragedy, and joy that is embodied in jazz. Her name might not be as well known as Ellington, Miles, Coltrane, or Louis Armstrong, but Mary Lou was just as influential as each of them in shaping the identity of jazz. She was ahead of her time, a genius. During an era when jazz was the nation's most popular music, Mary Lou Williams was one of its greatest innovators. Defining Mary Lou Williams is an arduous and consuming task. After all, she is the only jazz performer to date to have played in every stylistic period of jazz, spanning the years from 1920s to the 1970s. At the time of her death in 1981, Mary Lou Williams had written more than 300 compositions or arrangements, recorded over 100 records. Williams wrote and arranged for such band leaders as Duke Ellington and Benny Goodman, and she was friend, mentor, and teacher to Thelonious Monk, Charlie Parker, Miles Davis, Tad Dameron, Dizzy Gillespie, and many others. She operated within the collegial but male-dominated boundaries of jazz ensembles, and although the experiences were less than perfect, they had earned her a level of fame that was comparable to that of many of her well-known counterparts. No woman other than vocalists Billie Holiday and Ella Fitzgerald had so dominated the swing scene or earned the genuine respect of band leaders and musicians alike. Mary had seemingly broken through the glass ceiling that had prevented many talented jazzwomen from pursuing their professional goals. She had no intention of being an activist or spokesperson for what could safely be termed feminist causes. Instead, she wanted to write music, expand her knowledge of the art form by studying the compositions of European composers, and find happiness in her personal life. To Mary, Harlem was both exciting and frightening. In 1927, it was a bustling haven for migrant blacks from the eastern seaboard seeking new lives, and the cradle of the new black cultural renaissance. Since 1900, blacks had been migrating to the borough, abandoning the West Side, where they had previously been concentrated. Up until 1900, Harlem had been largely a white neighborhood, but by 1930, most of its population was replaced by blacks who inhabited every part of the district. The Harlem Renaissance had peaked as black intellectuals, writers, painters, and composers attempted to provide America with a different representation of black life. This Renaissance, also known as the New Negro Movement, separated black highbrow and lowbrow cultures. Average residents struggled daily to make ends meet and released their stress through the music and dance of the rent parties, nightclubs, and ballrooms scattered around the borough. As Mary continued to navigate through the New York jazz scene, a new underground jazz movement grabbed her attention. This movement was headed by a group of young musicians, Thelonious Monk, Dizzy Gillespie, Charlie Parker, Max Roach, who believed that swing had diluted jazz and had pushed black musicians and band leaders into obscurity. This newly conceived sound, called bebop because of the rapid-fire phrases musicians played, would become these musicians' response to swing and to the commercialization of jazz. Mary's apartment at 63 Hamilton Terrace in Harlem became a meeting place for emerging jazz artists. Each night, she hosted musicians as they sat around discussing music, listening to recordings, and writing new tunes. Thelonious Monk, Kenny Dorham, Bud Powell, Billy Strayhorn, plus various disc jockeys and newspapermen would be in and out of my place at all hours, and we'd really have a ball. Mary became the matriarch of the modern jazz movement when she opened her apartment and ears to the musical and personal concerns of bebop musicians. Mary Lou Williams was born May 8, 1910. The second of 11 children, Williams was born in Atlanta, Georgia, and grew up in the East Liberty neighborhood of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Williams received early instruction from her mother, a classically trained pianist. Picking out simple tunes at age 2, Mary Lou was a prodigy with perfect pitch and a highly developed musical memory by the time she was 4 years old. By age 10, she was known as the Little Piano Girl and was performing for small audiences throughout Pittsburgh. Mary Lou Williams played piano out of necessity at a very young age. She supported her 10 half-brothers and sisters by playing at parties. Her professional debut with big bands came in 1922 at age 12, when she substituted for a pianist in the Buzz and Harris Revue, a traveling show. Billed as Mary Lou Burley, she toured occasionally for the next few years and passed through New York City several times, playing for such artists as Jelly Roll Morton, Willie Smith, Fats Waller, and Duke Ellington. During a trip to Chicago, she recorded Drag 'Em and Nightlife as piano solos. The record sold quickly, raising Williams to national prominence. Soon after the recording session, she became Kirk's permanent second pianist, playing solo gigs and working as a freelance arranger for Earl Hines, Benny Goodman, and Tommy Dorsey. By the late 1930s, Williams was arranging for Ellington, Louis Armstrong, Tommy Dorsey, Benny Goodman, Cab Calloway, and many others. She remained with Kirk until 1942 when she moved to New York City. One of her most notable works of this period was the popular Trumpet No End, recorded by Ellington in 1946. By 1943, Williams was organizing bands and performing at many clubs in the city. She became involved with a younger group of New York musicians: Bud Powell, Thelonious Monk, Charlie Parker, and Dizzy Gillespie. Already an established musician in the swing style, she easily made the transition to bebop. Williams accepted a job at the Cafe Society downtown, started a weekly radio show called Mary Lou Williams's Piano Workshop on WNEW, and began mentoring and collaborating with younger bebop musicians such as Dizzy Gillespie and Thelonious Monk. It was during her nightly performances at New York's Cafe Society Uptown, the city's first integrated nightclub, that Mary began working on a new set of compositions based on the signs of the zodiac. Zodiac Suite. This 12-part collection of songs, one for each sign of the zodiac, is sweeping in its range and power. Each of the individual parts was influenced by one of her contemporaries: Billie Holiday, Art Tatum, Ben Webster, Miles Davis, and others. In 1952, Williams accepted an offer to perform in England and ended up staying in Europe for 2 years. By this time, her musical career had left Williams mentally and physically drained. A 3-year hiatus from performing began when she suddenly backed away from the piano during a performance in Paris in 1954. She returned to the United States, converting to Catholicism in 1954. Her energies were then devoted mainly to the Bel Canto Foundation, an effort she initiated using her savings as well as help from friends to turn her apartment into a halfway house for musicians who were grappling with addiction. Her hiatus may have been triggered by the death of her longtime friend and student Charlie Parker in 1955, who also struggled with addiction for the majority of his life. For years, the priests who had been Mary's friends had begged her to compose a jazz mass. Mary had never seriously considered it until she started working at a Catholic high school. It not only broadened her perspective on the possibilities of religious jazz music, but also became a great vehicle for teaching her students. Mary's first attempt at writing an extended composition was simply called Mass, entitled Black Christ of the Andres, inspired by Saint Martin de Porres, patron saint of those who seek racial harmony and son of a freed slave. It was first performed in November 1962 at St. Francis Xavier Church in Manhattan. Throughout the 1960s, Williams' composing concentrated on sacred music, hymns, and masses. One of the masses, Music for Peace, was choreographed by Alvin Ailey and performed by the Alvin Ailey Dance Theater as Mary Lou's Mass in 1971. The last years of Mary's life saw the flowering of her faith and her desire to use her music in ways that would raise social consciousness and bring emotional healing to her listeners. Mary was a woman searching for inner peace, a peace that would surpass all understanding. Throughout the 1970s, Williams' career flourished. She released numerous albums, including as solo pianist and commentator on The History of Jazz. She then accepted an appointment at Duke University as artist-in-residence, teaching the history of jazz with Father O'Brien and directing the Duke Jazz Ensemble. Williams's final recording, Solo Recital, in 1978, 3 years before her death, had a medley encompassing spirituals, ragtime, blues, and swing. Other highlights include Williams's reworkings of Tea for Two, Honeysuckle Rose, and her two compositions, Little Joe from Chicago, and What's Your Story, Morning Glory. In 1981, Mary Lou Williams died of bladder cancer in Durham, North Carolina, at the age of 71. Dizzy Gillespie, Benny Goodman, and Andy Kirk attended her funeral. She was buried in the Calvary Catholic Cemetery in Pittsburgh. Looking back at the end of her life, Mary Lou Williams said, "I did it, didn't I? Through muck and mud." This is Tim from One Track Jazz. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to like and subscribe.